They look at, what is the environment? What kind of forum are we in? Is it a traditional public forum or something that is where you would have less protection for your rights? And then the next thing they look at is the restriction on speech content-based or content neutral? Okay, so the content neutral, typically like a noise ordinance, it'll say that you can't have you can't make noise in a certain place at a certain time over a certain number of decibels, or sometimes they'll use unreasonably loud, or something like that. And those kind of restrictions are content neutral most of the time, where it's not depending on what is being spoken, it's just the manner that it's spoken. And you can have content neutral restrictions on the time, the place, or the manner of the speech. And then on the other hand, you may have content-based restrictions, which can either be viewpoint discrimination or topic discrimination. And a viewpoint discrimination is where a particular idea or a particular point of view is being prohibited. That's being selected for a restriction by the government policy or ordinance or whatever it is. And sometimes you'll have topic discrimination where, for example, I'll give you an example. If they say, you can't preach that Jesus is the only way to heaven, we're not going to allow you to do that. That would be viewpoint discrimination, okay? Because they're taking a particular point of view and say, you can't say this. You can preach about Jesus, you can preach about Muhammad, you can preach about, whatever you want, but we're not going to let you say that one religion is right and other religions are wrong. So that would be a viewpoint content-based discrimination. On the other hand, they may say, you know what, just don't talk about religion at all. You can talk about politics, you can talk about sports, you can talk about social issues, but leave religion out of it, okay? That is a content-based restriction. It's taking a whole topic, a whole area of ideas or of speech, and it's saying that's off limits, whereas other things are allowed. In either case, whether it's viewpoint discrimination or topic discrimination, it is a form of censorship which violates the Constitution. Usually, okay, if there is if the court determines that there was a content-based restriction on speech, they apply what's called strict scrutiny when the court is looking at what how to evaluate this law or the ordinance. The court applies this test, that it was necessary to serve a compelling state interest and that it was narrowly drawn to achieve that end. Okay, that's a lot of legalese, a lot of legal terms, but what it's saying is it's very difficult for a law or an ordinance that restricts speech to pass this test. Once the court says this was a content-based restriction on speech, they're almost always going to say, therefore, it's unconstitutional because it can't meet the strict scrutiny test. A compelling state interest is a very strong state interest. Necessary is a very strong word, and it has to be narrowly drawn to achieve that end, which means basically it's the restrictions that the state has imposed are the least amount of restriction, that the state is not being any more restrictive than absolutely necessary in order to achieve that compelling state interest. And so the courts have said content-based restrictions on speech are presumptively unconstitutional, that they're almost always going to be held unconstitutional. Off the top of my head, I can only think of one example where a content-based restriction on speech was upheld, and that was in the case of, they had restrictions on political campaigning within a certain distance of a polling place on an election day. So once you get within whatever that zone was, I don't remember if it was 500 feet of a polling place or 200 feet, whatever it was. Once you get within that zone of a polling place, you could not be in there with your campaign signs and your megaphones and your campaign speeches, and that is a content-based restriction. It's taking the whole topic of political speech and making it off limits just in that one location. And the court upheld that because free speech, of course, is a very fundamental constitutional right that we have, but voting is also a very fundamental constitutional right that we have, and they felt that this was necessary in order to prevent voter fraud and voter intimidation. And they had a list of reasons why they said we need to have just kind of a sterile zone around the polling places so that people could go there and not feel pressured or attacked or whatever the case may be. So that's very unusual for the court to say, okay, we've got a content-based restriction on speech and we're going to uphold it anyway. Almost all the time, if it's content-based, the court is going to strike it down. Okay. If it's content neutral, if it's not content based, but it's content neutral, such as a typical noise ordinance, then it's a different test. The court doesn't apply strict scrutiny, it applies intermediate scrutiny. And that is that the restriction has to be a reasonable time, place, or manner restriction that is narrowly tailored to serve a significant state interest, and it leaves open ample alternative channels of communication. And again, that's a mouthful of legal terms. And I go into a lot more depth in this in the booklet. So, if you pick up one of these booklets, there's I have a section in there on content-based versus content-neutral restrictions. And we go into a lot more detail. And I not only, I give statements of what the law is. I give you footnotes. There's hundreds of footnotes in this booklet, and I also give you examples. At the close of just about every section, I give examples to try to get the point across. But so the court in each of these cases is, when it talks about strict scrutiny or intermediate scrutiny, the court is scrutinizing the government's justification for making a law or an ordinance that restricts speech. And the government is on the defensive. If you're challenging a law that restricts speech and you bring that into court, the government has to explain to the court what is its reason, what is the purpose, what is the interest that it's trying to serve, and convince the court that that is a significant enough interest or a compelling enough interest to justify restriction on speech. And then once the government says, okay, well, this is the goal that we're trying to accomplish with this restriction on our citizens' liberty, this is the goal that we're trying to accomplish, then the court looks at, okay, well, that's your goal. Now we analyze the law that you've made and determine, does that law accomplish the goal within the framework of these various constitutional tests? So my purpose today is to not make you all legal experts on on how this works, but I want you to have, at least a basic understanding of some of these constitutional issues, so that you can at least, when you come up against a restriction on your speech, that you'll have some idea, does this seem right or not? And I'll go into through some other examples. But anyway, so that's how the intermediate scrutiny works. There are other constitutional challenges besides just whether they meet the strict scrutiny test or the intermediate scrutiny test. There are various other types of challenges. One is when there's a prior restraint on speech, which again is not, sometimes they're valid and sometimes they're unconstitutional. But the fact that there's been a prior restraint, such as they say you have to go get a permit in order to do whatever it is that you're doing. You have to get a permit to pass out literature, or you have to get a permit to gather together and have a street meeting or whatever it is that you're doing. That is a prior restraint. And if there's a prior restraint, then there are some restrictions that the court has imposed, that the government has to meet certain restrictions in order for that prior restraint to be legal. And again, I'm just going to go through this part kind of quickly, because we go into a lot more detail in the booklet, and I want to get to the more practical parts of the thing. But another avenue of attack for a restriction on speech is if it allows unbridled discretion to either the official that is granting or denying permission for something, or if it's unbridled discretion it gives unbridled discretion to a police officer in enforcing it. In other words, a law has to have some certainty to it, and you don't want to have a situation where somebody, a lot of times this comes up in a permit situation, where the law doesn't give sufficient guidelines to the official that's granting or denying a permit. And so then the court says, well, that's unconstitutional because the official has unbridled discretion. If you have to go to the chief of police to get a permit to use amplification, and that ordinance says that, here's how the chief of police is supposed to determine that based on, and then there's certain criteria, then, that may be fine. But if it just says, the police chief has to consider these 5 factors and any other factor that the chief of police feels is relevant, well, that gives the chief of police carte blanche to grant or deny the permit. And the problem is, if an official has just total say of whether to grant or deny something, that invites censorship. It invites discrimination, where the official can just say, well, no, I'm not granting to you, but I am going to grant it to them. And there's no way to tell whether they're exceeding their authority, or violating any guidelines, because there haven't been sufficient guidelines. So that's a problem when you have a permitting scheme like that, or some other restriction that gives the official too much leeway as far as what to allow or not to allow. Another thing, and this is kind of related, you can have an ordinance that is too vague. It doesn't give sufficient description of what is being allowed or what is being restricted. And again, that causes a problem, because somebody that's wanting to speak or exercise their free speech rights, and they want to do so consistently with the law. If the law isn't clear on where the lines are, then the person may violate the law without intending to, or even more important to that from a constitutional point of view, the person may censor themselves and restrict what they say because they don't want to they want to be sure they don't go over the line. And so now they've got, restrictions on what they're doing because the law was too vague. And so if it's too vague, it's unconstitutional. And a lot of times you can have a vague law and it also be overly broad. Or you can have an overbroad law that's not vague at all, but it's just overbroad. It restricts way too much speech than is necessary for the purpose that the government is trying to achieve. A law that's too broad is, I'll give an example. We had a noise ordinance in the city of DeLand that prohibited, quote, loud, disturbing, and unnecessary noise. And we had a young man that was cited under that ordinance, and his case came to court. So I said, I'll take care of it for you. And I filed a motion to dismiss the charge, claiming that the law was overly broad. And I think I said it was vague also. The problem is that description of the noise being loud, disturbing, and unnecessary, at the very least, unnecessary is a term that's very difficult to define or put into practice, because from his point of view, preaching the gospel was very necessary, and from somebody else's point of view, I don't need to hear this. So so loud and disturbing is another one. Well, what does disturbing mean? If somebody doesn't like it, then that means you could whisper the gospel to someone and it disturbs them and they think it's unnecessary, and so now you violated the noise ordinance because you were loud, disturbing, and unnecessary. So so that we have situations like that, and in that case the city attorney just dropped the charge, and so that was good. The next one we have is selective enforcement, and that's where the law is perfectly valid on its face, but the way it's applied it's applied in a discriminatory way. And I'll give you an example of this that happened. The case came out just a few months ago. There was, I think the incident was probably in 2021 or 2022. You remember back during the pandemic era, there was a large Black Lives Matter movement all across the country. Well, the city of Washington, D.C. had an ordinance that prohibited defacing public property. And during the Black Lives Matter movement, people were taking spray paint cans and painting Black Lives Matter all over the place, on bridges, on sidewalks, on police cars, whatever. In the middle of the street, they were painting this message. And for months and months and months, this message was done all over the city of Washington, D.C. And nobody was arrested, nobody was prosecuted. The city did not enforce that at all for the Black Lives Matter message. During that same time frame, or towards the end of that same time frame, there was a student organization. I don't remember what the name of it was, and they wanted to have a rally, a public rally, and they wanted to, and so they applied for a permit, and the permit was granted. And they told the city that one of the things we want to do is we want to write on the sidewalk with sidewalk chalk our message, which is Black Unborn Lives Matter. It was a pro-life student group, and they wanted their message, Black Unborn Lives Matter, to be, and they were going to write it on sidewalk chalk that the rain was going to wash away. You know, we're not talking about permanent paint or anything. And so they got their permit, but the city sent a bunch of police to their thing to monitor them. And as soon as the students started writing their message in chalk on the sidewalk, they were arrested. And so the case went to court. This is in Washington, D.C., so it went to federal court, and they actually the district court said that the students didn't have a case against the city, but it went up on appeal, and the D.C. Circuit Court reversed and said, based on these facts as they come before the court, that they have a case based on selective enforcement under the First Amendment, that you can't, if you are in a similar situation, if you are similarly situated is the legal term, to another group where the police or the city chooses to let the other group have a pass, but they don't give that to you because the other group has a different message, but your group has a message that's disfavored by the city, that the city has violated your rights. And so that's an example of selective enforcement. And then this is kind of a rare thing that I came across under my research. It's called an unconstitutional condition, and that's where the government imposes a situation where, in order to exercise your First Amendment rights, that exercise of your First Amendment rights is conditioned upon you giving up some other rights. And the context was some kind of big protest rally that they had. I think it was in Georgia somewhere. Anyway, they had this big rally, and I talk about it in the book, that and it was in this big park that there's all kinds of public rallies and public events, but for this one particular event, the city imposed the restriction that yes, you can have your rally in this park, but everyone is going to have to go through a metal detector in order to get into your rally. And so basically, you're giving up your Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure in order to exercise your First Amendment rights to attend the rally. And the court said they can't do that. If you can't have what they called it was an unconstitutional condition. So that's not something that we see come up very much at all. But it's an interesting concept, and one more tool for us to have in our bag, for when there's a situation where speech is being restricted. So, okay. So now we get to ways that you can challenge an unconstitutional policy. Sometimes you get a heads up that that there's going to be. This has happened to us in DeLand a few times. We've had a street ministry there since 1985, and every Friday afternoon, we have people that go downtown DeLand, stand on the street corners, hand out gospel tracts, hold scripture signs, do some public preaching for like an hour and a half on Friday afternoon. And every once in a while, we get the local merchants association gets together and decides that they want to pressure the city in order to make us, put some restrictions on us because they don't like us down there doing that. So one thing that you can do we heard that the city council was going to meet in order to consider some proposals for what ordinances can they enact in order to restrict us. Can they say we're going to make a free speech zone and put it in a park outside the downtown area? I mean, we're two main streets downtown DeLand. That is the center of town. In fact, that's where the politicians go when they're campaigning for office. They're standing out there on those same street corners holding their campaign signs. So that's where we go because it's a good place for the, to get our message out to the public. And so they were trying to come up with some way to appease these downtown merchants to get us out of their hair, even though, we're not burning down their businesses and we're not protesting them and we're not, it's just kind of unreasonable in my view how they oppose us sometimes. But every few years it seems like, they get a movement together to do that. So we found out that there was going to be a city council meeting, and so we had over 100 of us show up at the meeting. We had these stickers printed up. It says, "I support free speech." And so you have 100 people crowding into, actually it's probably more than 100, crowding into the city council chambers wearing "I support free speech" sticker. And we had several people speak against any proposal that's going to restrict our liberty of free speech in downtown DeLand. And when it was time for the politicians on the city council to speak, you've never seen so much backpedaling. Like, nobody had any inclination at all to restrict free speech in downtown DeLand. We support the Constitution. We support free speech. Nobody's going to do anything. And so that was an effective way to deal with what could have been, what they were contemplating doing, I'm confident would have been unconstitutional. But we didn't want to go through all kinds of court procedures to prove that we had a right to do something. We wanted them to leave us alone so we could be out on the street and do what we're doing. So that's one way, is just to have some political opposition to what they're proposing to do. We have some funny stories in connection with this. One of them is we had a guy that had a store downtown, and he did everything he could to oppose us. At one point, he put these loud amplifiers outside of his store, right there at the intersection downtown DeLand. His store was on the corner, and when we had people there, he just played blaring music, much louder than anything that we had done. And anyway, so at some point there was a city meeting, and he came to the city council meeting, and we, as always, when we get word of this, we go ahead and we fill the council chambers. So we did this same thing again. We had, people came, and we had, families with little children. I mean, and we came in and we filled the benches, and we had kids sitting on the floor, and everybody was quiet and polite. They probably, that probably freaked them out, to some degree. How do we have these little kids and they're not bouncing off the walls and making a lot of noise? They were well behaved, nice, orderly kids and family. And this guy was, so we had people speaking against any restrictions that they might impose. And this shop owner went in, and he was giving his speech, and these preachers are out there out on the street. They're there every Friday afternoon, shouting, "Jesus saves!" And when he yelled, "Jesus saves," all of us in the courtroom just spontaneously were, "Amen!" And I mean, I don't think anybody even thought what they were doing. Somebody yelled, "Jesus saves!" and "Amen!" And the mayor was pounding his gavel, order. So that was a funny one. There was another one where a different meeting they had where they had a bunch of different community leaders. We have Stetson University is there in DeLand, and so they had somebody from Stetson University come to this meeting, and they had some business owners come to the meeting, and they invited me to the meeting, and they were going to talk about what can we do about let's have a dialogue about the street preaching. So they had this meeting all called together, and whoever was running the meeting said, well, we invited Jake Jackson. He's the attorney for the church that does all this, public preaching and stuff down here. And so I thought they were going to ask me questions, and I was going to answer their questions, but they just handed me the microphone and say, "Okay, Jake, tell us what you want to tell us." So I told them that we're not trying to disrupt anybody's business. We're not trying to be obnoxious. We're just trying to get the gospel out, and the reason is because. And then I told them why the gospel was important, and I told them what the gospel is, and you should see these people around this big conference table. They were just squirming like they had ants in their pants. I mean, they were very uncomfortable. So you get all kinds of opportunities just by being a part of the community and being aware of what's going on in the community. And sometimes you can head off problems before they become big problems. We haven't had any objections to us since the green-haired lady has been downtown for the past almost 10 years now. Now it's not just the crazy Christians that are out there, making use of their First Amendment rights, but there's somebody else out there too. And I guess it's just apparent that this is a public forum where people come in and they're just going to have to live with it. So anyway, so that's one thing to do. Another is you can contact the city officials, and when you realize that they have an improper policy or they've threatened an improper policy, you can contact them and get written assurance that or request written assurance that they're not going to do anything that's going to restrict your rights. One example of this was, we had a parade that we were going to do, a Christmas parade. We go to several Christmas parades and hand out gospel tracts there. And normally what we do is before the parade starts, we just go down the parade route and hand out the gospel tracts to the people that are assembled there, before the parade comes. And then the parade comes and actually a Christmas parade is a good, or any parade really is a good, people are just sitting there waiting for something to happen and they got nothing to do. They're bored. And so they'll take the gospel tracts because it's something for them to read or something they can use to fan themselves if it's hot. I mean, people receive the tracts. So that's a good place to do that. But anyway, so in the past we had gotten, we had been told that we couldn't distribute anything. Nobody's allowed to distribute anything from the parade route, and which is strange because they have vendors that go there that are selling balloons or whatever else they sell there, and then the people on the floats, they're the mayor is throwing candy out to people on the sides of the parade route, and yet they told us. So anyway, so I contacted them, said I want to get this straightened out before the parade this time, and they changed their policy or clarified their policy, and the city manager's office sent me a copy of a memorandum that they did to the from the city manager to the Parks Department and the Director of Public Safety that says that also, even if a group is not an applicant participating in the parade, they may distribute flyers along the parade route to those willing to accept the flyers. So then when you go to the parade, you take that with you, and when somebody says, hey, you can't do this here because we used to have a policy that prohibited it, well, now we've got it in writing, and hopefully that'll reduce the time you have to spend dealing with somebody that is trying to do something they shouldn't do. So, okay. So another thing that you can do is you can file a lawsuit to declare the policy unconstitutional. And again, that's not really what we are about. I usually try to convince the city manager and the city attorney and the chief of police that their policy is unconstitutional, and they don't want to go to court over it. And usually you can get a meeting of the minds. Usually you can get an agreement. Most of my experience is most of the improper, unconstitutional restrictions against our rights come about from people that are not vindictive and not trying to do anything wrong or to restrict our liberty, but they just don't know any better, and they don't realize that what they've got violates the law. And so if you contact them and say, I'm concerned about this, here's what your policy appears to be, and then here's what the law says, and I give them the court cases and everything that shows that what they're doing is wrong. A lot of times they'll just say, they'll agree that that's right, we're not going to do that. I'll have them send me an email or send me a letter that confirms that, so that we can, again, you want to have documentation with you in a situation like that if you can. But anyway, so you can file a lawsuit to declare the policy unconstitutional. Another thing you can do is ignore the policy, exercise your right, and then when they order you to stop, then you document that, and I'll go over that in a few minutes when we're going on the section of dealing with the police. Once you're ordered to stop, then you can file the lawsuit, or then you can, then you have more ammunition to go back to the city attorney or the mayor or whoever you're dealing with and say, look, this is a violation of our rights. And, my approach to them has always been, look, my purpose is not to bring a lawsuit against you. My purpose is to solve the problem, get an agreement here so that our people can go back and start exercising their rights again and not be subject to harassment or arrest by the police. So another option is, and I don't recommend this, but another option is to exercise your right to evangelize. And instead of stopping when they tell you to stop, you have them arrest you, and then you can defend the charge in criminal court. And then if you win, you can file suit in civil court against them. By the way, this does not give you any advantage over this. If they have ordered you to stop evangelizing, and they're wrong, ordering you to stop is enough to give you grounds to file a lawsuit. You don't have to get arrested and go to jail. So it's some people don't understand that. They think, well, I'm going to get arrested and then I'll file a lawsuit against them. Well, first of all, our goal isn't to file lawsuits. Our goal is to get the gospel out. But you don't have more standing to file a lawsuit because you got arrested. If you've documented, it's clear that they've ordered you to stop improperly, then they've violated your rights right there. Arresting you is not another violation, or is not required to establish that your rights have been violated. So, all right. Any questions on that up to this point? Because now we're going to get into the real practical stuff that hopefully will be real helpful for everybody.
One area is our police around here. There's a entity that's quasi-government, and it's called a university out here, and they claim the ability to act in the place of the parent. They call it in loco parentis or something like that.
Okay.
And what they'll do is they'll say, you can come out here, but you got to be over here, or you got to be over there, which could be away from a traffic here.
Right.
And problem number two is when they do that, they once they say you only can be in one place, now the hecklers have a bullseye, and that heckler's veto is potentially in play.
Yeah.
It's not only religious groups, but political groups find that out, where they will go to one venue, one building on the campus, and it'll be mobbed with hecklers, and then they'll just move to another.
Yeah.
Or maybe one off.
Okay, yeah, and the answer is that a university, even a public university, normally is not considered a traditional public forum. It may be owned by a government entity, but it is an educational institution, and their mission is an educational mission, and they can use their property and restrict their property for that. So we don't have as much liberty just across a university campus as we do in a public park. Now, sometimes the university will have a policy that opens up their campus or parts of their campus, and then when they do, the First Amendment applies to what is opened up to the public. But we don't get to just choose wherever we want to go on a university campus. Some states, Florida, recently passed a law that said all public universities, all of the green space and public areas on public university campuses are to be considered public forums for First Amendment purposes, and people from the communities can come and use that space on campus. And I know that I understand that Tennessee has a statute that says the students can use the whole any public area in the campus as a free speech area, but people that are unaffiliated with the university that want to come on campus and do that don't have that same liberty. Yeah.
What happened? Yeah, there is a place like that out here at Tennessee Tech. They have a place that's for students. They can say anything they want to. They can write anything they want to on the sidewalk or whatever. But if you're from outside, if you're not a registered student,
yeah,
that's not for you to go over there and say.
That's right. You have to be student or staff or faculty in order to take advantage of that. And there's some of this is a gray area. Okay, and I know we're planning today before the football game at Tech. We're going to go out there, and that's where we've chosen to try to get tracts out and do some witnessing later this afternoon. And and I've talked to the university attorney. I've talked to Brother Jimmy about this. That the university is taking the position that Stadium Drive and it's not a public street. It's a university street. And they're taking the position that they have the right to restrict that. I look at it. I drove from one end of it to the other, and an argument can be made that it should function as a traditional public forum, because you can get from 12th Street to 7th Street, which are both public streets, just by driving down Stadium Drive, and there's nothing that restricts you. On University of Florida, you can't drive on campus. They have these on each road that goes into the campus. They have a little hut, and there's a hut woman in there that says, what's your business? What are you doing? And they won't let you come on campus. Tech doesn't have that. Anybody can just walk down the sidewalk, ride a bike down the sidewalk, drive down the street, and they can go. So I think there's an argument that they have to treat that as a public forum, but it's a gray area, and I don't like to, I like to know that I'm right when I tell people, look, they're telling you one thing, but you can do something different. And I'm not to the point at this, today to say, well, we can. Now, what they do have is right across Stadium Drive from the stadium, they have a parking lot, and they're going to have part of that parking lot for tailgating and part of that parking lot for public parking. Anybody in the public, you don't have to have a ticket to the game. You can go and park there. So they've opened that to the public, and we can go there and we can pass out tracts there. We can pass out tracts on 12th Avenue by the state, or hold signs along the sidewalk on 12th Avenue by the stadium. I'm expecting there'll be lots of cars coming in and out. We might be able to do some preaching from there, and that's probably a good venue for that. But at this point, and I tried to reason with city attorney. I called the one of the administrators, I can't remember her name, at the university, and tried to reason with them and get them to agree. And we never came to an agreement. And the law, it just isn't clear right now. And so I wouldn't say let's go and test it and possibly be proven wrong. If we're going to take a step like that, we want to know that we're right and that we're going to win if it goes to court. So that's the approach for today.
But mentioned to you that they were taking to court over somebody street preaching on the university and law.
Yep. That's the McGlone case.
It's a bit nicer since then.
That's the McGlone case, and they did lose that. And then after that case, they changed their written policies for how the public can use the campus. Where they used to have the policy before that decision was made, they had a policy that said, with all this glowing language about how we support free speech in any area of the campus. Anyway, they made it where this would have been what's called a designated public forum. Since then, they changed their policy, and their policy now states that any area of the campus that isn't specifically opened up and where the public is invited to speak is a non-public part of the campus. So they changed that. The reason they lost is because how their policy was written. They changed their policy, and that they took that away from us. So it's kind of a technical argument, but bottom line is, we'll do what we can there today, and but you have a good point that it's frustrating that they can restrict us. Yes, sir.
Would that be because they're like private property?
Yeah, it's like, well, it's
privately owned.
Well, it's not that it's privately owned. It's a public university, but like I say, the sheriff's department is public property, but it's not a public forum for free speech. You can't go into the sheriff's office with gospel signs and start handing out tracts to everybody at their desk, and so it's the sheriff's office is an office building. The university is an educational campus. Those are not the same as a public forum for speech.
On the street, you would say.
Mm-hmm.
Would that go back to the example you said earlier about like the shopping plaza with the street being?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. And the thing is, there are cases on both sides. There's a case. It's from another circuit, a case from the 11th Circuit, where they looked at the same issue, a university street on campus that was owned by the university. It's not a city street. And the question, the case was decided on, well, was this a traditional public forum or not? And the argument on the one side was, well, it's pretty much indistinguishable from the other city streets, and it's connected to the city streets, and how's anybody to know, whether it's a city street or a university street? And one of the things the court focused on was that the street signs, instead of the typical city street signs that gave the name of the street, they had a different color sign. It had the university's colors, and it had, so it was a university of such and such, and this street. And for some reason, with that court, they were persuaded that made it, well, that was one of several factors that made it a closed university street and not a public street. And part of it is, an interior street or an interior sidewalk that just goes to a facility is not the same as one that goes across the perimeter. And so,
wouldn't it be like, well, who maintains it? Like when you have a sidewalk, the property owner is supposed to maintain their sidewalk in the winter by shoveling it. Now, if the college has the street, are they maintaining it from potholes, maintenance, and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Would that make a deciding factor for them?
Yeah, that could have something to do with it, and that street is a university maintained street. The city, the county has nothing to do with it. The university maintains it. Yeah. Yes, sir.
And since you talking with the campus attorney last year, the end of the football season, and then the first home game last week, when we stayed on the parking lot area, no one has approached us or given us any problem like it was prior when we were standing on the sidewalk on closest to the stadium.
Right.
So the advice that was given has been working very good for our church.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Very good. All right. Let's go on to the meat and potatoes stuff. Real practical considerations. First of all, precautions. Number one, you need to know what the law is in that location. And I'll give you an example. In the city of Daytona Beach, Florida, there is an ordinance that says if you're going to be distributing literature, you have to hand it to a person who's willing to receive it. You can't just leave it under the windshield of a car. You can't leave it in a phone booth, if you can find a phone booth anymore, or a public restroom or whatever. You're not allowed to just leave your literature somewhere for somebody to pick up. They have an ordinance that says you have to hand it to someone willing to receive it. So in DeLand, you can go up and down a public street, and you can put tracts on cars. In Daytona Beach, it's illegal to do that. So you need to do that because we want to obey.
Where can you actually find city ordinances? You have to go to the city, or
you can
online?
You can almost always find it online, and and you can just Google that. Yes, sir.
What terms would you normally look for these types of ordinances? Would you look for proselyting ordinance or?
Well, yeah, that's
distribution?
Yeah. There's what you have to do is if you just Google the name of the city and then ordinances, usually you'll get a link. A lot of times it's on a site called Municode, MUNICODE, which has city ordinances from all around the country. It doesn't have all of them. Some cities will just have them on their own website or whatever. But you should be able to find the city ordinances, and then you really just have to kind of scroll through and see what's there, because sometimes they'll specifically have an ordinance on distribution of literature or distribution of handbills or something like that. And sometimes they'll have a miscellaneous section, miscellaneous ordinances, or they'll have, use of public streets and sidewalks. And then somewhere in that, you'll find, oh, well, they restrict doing this, that, or the other. So they're not always coded the same, but it's usually not too hard to find the ordinances, and you can scroll down past most of the ones that are obviously irrelevant, and then just take a closer look at the ones that look like they might apply. Sometimes there'll be the parades and public events, and sometimes in that they'll have a restriction on gathering. If you have more than 10 people gathered at an event, then there's some restrictions that apply or whatever. I mean, you just have to kind of take a look, but it's good to at least try to look before you go. You can always contact me too, say, hey, we're going to try to start doing some ministry in such and such a city. Can you tell us, if there's anything to look out for? And I'll look up the codes for you and let you know if there's anything that looks like it might be problematic. So check the ordinances. It's good to contact city officials to let them know you're coming, let them know what you're doing. Don't ask permission. Never ask permission. If you ask a bureaucrat permission for something, they're going to say no, or they're going to say, we'll get back to you, and then they're going to look for a reason to say no. And we don't ask permission. We have a right to do what we're doing, but we want to give them a heads up. And it can be extremely helpful to have that initial contact with the city. We went the first time our church decided to go to to an event that they had in Titusville, Florida. It's called a Bacchus event, which was a Bacchus festival, which was some kind of wine tasting thing that they had, and that they closed off some public streets downtown in Titusville, and they had this event, and there were vendors and food booths and all kinds of stuff there. We didn't care what it was for. We just wanted to get some gospel tracts out. So we went there. I contacted the city attorney's office ahead of time, and I said, we're from the Bible Baptist Church in DeLand. We're planning to come to this Bacchus festival. I just wanted to let you know what it is that we're doing. And, we've had problems in other locations where we've run into trouble where we go to an event and then somebody calls the police, and the police come and say, oh, you can't do this here. And, we want to make sure that we're not going to be interfered with by the police. And the city attorney said, oh, no, we have a very well-trained, very professional police department. You don't have to worry about that. And, if there's any issue, here's Lieutenant so-and-so's name, and gave me the name of a police lieutenant in case there was any issue. So we went to the Bacchus Festival, and we started, we just stepped into the venue before we had really done anything. And some Gestapo lady that ran the thing, was all over us. You can't do this here. This is our event, blah, 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 blah. And, we've already cleared this. We have a right to do this. It's a public venue. We're, respectfully, we're going to do this here. Well, I'm going to call the police. Well, go ahead, call the police. So she called the police, and the police officer, you could see him coming, and just in his bearing, the guy is like walking fast and sort of leaning forward and chest out, and he's ready for conflict. And so he comes up, who's in charge here, and starts doing his whole thing. And I said, sir, we've already talked to the city attorney. We let her know this is what we're doing. She told us that Lieutenant so-and-so knows, so I gave the city attorney's name. I gave the lieutenant's name. I said, this has already been cleared. And for the rest of the time that we were there, these two cops were dealing with the irate Gestapo lady, and she was just, and we were just pleasantly and peacefully going about our business, handing out gospel tracts and getting the word of God out. And the police left us completely alone just because I had made that one phone call ahead of time. And if I hadn't, then it would have been a struggle to deal with them. But, again, don't ask permission. Just let them just say, I'm giving you a heads up. This is who we are. This is what we're doing. We've been trained by, a First Amendment lawyer. We understand our rights. We're not going to be, and give them some assurances. We're not going to be interfering with the festival. We're not going to be shouting anybody down. We're not going to be blockading anybody's business. We're just, here to do what we're doing. So bring documentation with you if you have it. If you've got a copy of the ordinance, if you've got a copy of a letter or an email, again, there's a pedestrian bridge over a public highway that connects the bus station to a private shopping area that has restaurants and movie theaters and shops and stuff in Daytona Beach. And we would go there, and we'd be in the pedestrian overpass, which is a great place to pass out tracts because there's just continuously people funneling through there to go to the movie theater and go to the restaurants, and we get tracts out there. We also were downstairs. We're out on the boardwalk. This is over in Daytona Beach. And there was a guy that was a janitor at the it's called the Ocean Walks shops. And he didn't like us being there for whatever reason. I don't know what his problem was, but he would or get the security guy to come over and tell us, you can't do this here. And then, police are called and everything. So, and they claimed that this was their property. This overpass bridge that we were in, that they claimed that was their private property rather than county property, which didn't make sense to me, because how could they have a bridge over the highway that it's their property anyway? So so I did two things. I contacted the county attorney's office, and I also contacted the management company for that business. And I said, I'm an attorney in DeLand. I just want to establish what, who the owner is of this, who owns and controls this pedestrian bridge over the highway. For example, if somebody fell and injured themselves, would I be dealing with your company or would I be dealing with the county? And they said, oh, that would be the county. The county. We it's not our property. So I got from them that it was the county. And I also got an email from the county attorney's office that said that that is county property, and that yes, we do have the right to pass out our literature there. And so then when the police were called 2 or 3 more times over the next couple of years, we show them, look, we know this is county property. I've got the email from the county attorney's office. And so then it saves a lot of argument if you have what you need from them in documentation. Practical consideration. It's great to take kids out witnessing. In fact, kids have a great advantage, that cuteness factor, where they can hand a tract to somebody, where if you tried to hand them a tract, no, I don't want that. But your kid tries to hand them, oh, thank you, sweetie, and they take the gospel tract. And so it's great to take kids and have them participate in all of this, but make sure you supervise them. Just an obvious, practical thing, but we have to say all the obvious things because not everybody thinks of it. Review guidelines with them, have some rules, have some protocols, and say, look, this is how we do things. And some of the things on this list are things that you might want to have. Bring cell phones so you can communicate one with another in case anybody has a problem. This one I think is a very good one. Don't go off alone. If you have the ability to go in a group or at least with one other person, do that. We had one young man had wandered off from our group down the boardwalk, and when he came back, he told us about how some girl had just thrown her arms around him and was trying to be inappropriate with him, and he was all by himself. And if somebody said he had done something inappropriate, where's somebody to say, hey, I was there, I saw the whole thing, that's not what happened. So, that kind of thing doesn't happen much, but, don't take unnecessary risks. At the same time, I'm not saying never go witnessing alone. Sometimes you're by yourself, and, just be careful and responsible. I'm not saying that it's wrong to do that, but especially if you're with a church group, you don't want anybody saying your church group did something, or people from your church did something. If they were off by themselves, then who's to contradict whatever's being told about them. But so especially when you're doing as part of a church group, I would say don't go off by yourself. That's probably obsolete. Bring a camera. If you're bringing cell phones, you probably have a camera with you, but in case you don't, bring it. You can call me from the spot. I mean, don't call me late at night because I'm in bed, but or I just won't answer the phone. But if you're having an issue with somebody, that's part of what this ministry was designed for, was to help to talk people through problems that they're having, in connection with trying to do some public ministry. The next thing, handling objections. Just to think about some things that typically come up or are likely, may come up. Just to so that it doesn't take you by surprise. We'll just kind of go through these. I'm not going to give you, how to respond on every single one of these. In fact, number one, there's not just one right way to respond. Number two, you don't have to get in the last word. You don't, you can just be humble. And if somebody is being, if they're mocking, if they're being outrageous or whatever, you don't have to have an answer for anything. And a lot of times what happens with these objections, we're out on the sidewalk and we're doing this, and there's cars driving by. And so somebody will be sitting there at the red light and watching and listening and seeing what all is going on. And then when the light turns green and they start to drive off, then they'll have something smart alecky to say to you as they're driving away. Okay? So you don't have to shout something back at them and try to get the last word. Just you can let it go. And you're not obligated to discuss every topic. Somebody wants to bring up some kind of social or political issues, you can just say, I'm not here for that. They see you out there as a Christian and they think, oh, well, you must be Republican. You must love Donald Trump, or you must this, that, or the other. And it's like, that's not what we're here for. If we go out there and say, we're for this side or we're for that side, then we've alienated 50% of the people that we're trying to reach. And we're not out there for politics or social issues, and it disarms people a lot of times when you let them know and have some grace and have some charity about you when you talk to them. They come up to you, and why do you hate homosexuals? You don't know me. What do you mean I hate homosexuals? We're here to let people know about the grace of God, that Jesus Christ died for our sins. We're all sinners. We all need to be saved. And, we're just trying to let everybody know that. And it's good news. It's a message of love. It's a message of hope. It's a message of grace. We're not a threat to you. But they think, from what they see on TV, that, the Christians are rabidly on one political side of the spectrum. And so they think that if they're on the other side, they think we're their enemy. And that's not what we're there for. And you can go ahead and vote and go ahead and have an opinion, but that's not what we're here for. We're not obligated to debate. But if somebody wants to talk about, baptism or predestination or whatever their topic is, people are going to come up to you at some point and try to bring up these topics, and you can say, you know what, I'll be happy to have this discussion with you. Here's my email address, or here's my telephone number, and I'll do that with you, some other time. But I've dedicated this time to preaching the gospel to the people out there, not to have a doctrinal debate with other religious people. And so you can just defer that to another time, or you could say, that's just not what we're here for. Or you can go ahead and have the conversation. I'm not saying don't have the conversation. Go ahead and do what you want to and try to get the gospel to them. But all of these things, you don't have to do that. But people want to ask about evolution. People want to say, they just kind of declare their sin. 1 Timothy says Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. Sometimes they just declare their religion. I'm Jewish, I'm Catholic, I'm Buddhist. Nowadays we got a lot of people will say, I'm Muslim, which I doubt it, but that's what they claim. But the fact is, there's only one way to heaven, and that's Jesus Christ. And so Jesus died for everyone. He died for the sins of the whole world, and that's we're here to let them know that. But they use that as a defense. I'm a good person. The Bible says, no, we're not. We're all sinners. There's not a just man upon the earth which doeth good and sinneth not. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. Some people will say, I'm a good person, so I don't need it. Or they say, I've sinned too much already, and I'm beyond hope. I'm beyond saving. No, you're not. The grace of God reaches to the lowest sinner. So when we get the don't judge. Again, you don't have to get into a debate with everybody, but the fact is the Bible tells us to judge righteously. And if you read Matthew chapter 7, which is the don't judge verse, if you read it in context, it's not saying we're not supposed to make judgments. I mean, we make judgments you couldn't cross the street if you couldn't make a judgment, so we make judgments all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. But again, we don't have to debate that with them, but that's coming, and so and any of these, why does God allow such and such? And a lot of times these questions, you can tell that they start out as somebody just coming to let's stump the Christian. Let's just try to ask a question that's going to be too difficult for him to answer. And like I said, we're not obligated to answer all those questions, but what helps a lot of times, if you're willing to have the conversation with them, is to first say something like, if this is a sincere question, I'll be glad to talk to you about it. But if you just want to argue or you just want to mock, I'm not interested. I'm not interested in having the conversation. But if you're sincere, and sometimes they started out that they were mocking, but then you say that to them, and then all of a sudden they back up and they say, no, I really want to know. I'm interested. I really want to know. And you see the change in their demeanor, and now you can have a conversation with them, and just you show them respect, and you can get some exchange going. So and you can give doctrinal answers to these, or or you can, like I say, just defer them and say, you know what, these are more in-depth questions. I'm here to try to just get the gospel out. I'll be glad to get your email and we can talk about it further. Why are there so many religions? Why are there so many Bibles? Because Satan knows what he's doing is the short answer to that. That's Satan's work. There'll be hecklers, and again, don't respond in kind. We need to show some grace. We had a situation where we had a brother with us, and we were going down the street and witnessing, and there was some teenage boy out there on the sidewalk, and he just went, like that to this brother that was preaching. And so he looked at him, he said, "You won't do that when you stand before God." Okay, I can see, maybe saying that once. And the kid said, "Yes, I will." And he said, "No, you won't." And he said, "Yes, I will." And he said, "No, you won't." And I said, "Yes, I will." And he said, "No, you won't." And I'm thinking, brother, give it a rest. That's not what we're there for. And one of the things to think about is there's other people around that watch your conduct and how you react to other people. And I don't know how many times we've been out there and somebody has just been ridiculous. They cuss at us, they yell stupid things at us, and we respond with grace, or we don't respond verbally at all, and just let it go. And then we've had somebody come up to us from across the street. I saw how you handled when that person was harassing you, and I appreciate how you responded, and what is it that you guys are out here trying to do? And you get a good witness to somebody that was just a spectator to how you responded to somebody else being stupid. So we don't want to stoop to their level. Here's a favorite one for Christians who don't witness. to ask you, or they claim they're Christians. And what good does it do? Meaning, how many people have you had hit their knees and ask the Lord to save them right out there on the sidewalk? And, and the answer to that is we have seen that happen. But, what good it does, again, if they want to have, a mature, respectful conversation about it, it's Christians obeying the Lord and doing what he told them to do. That does some good right there. God likes to see his people. Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commandments. And this is a commandment for us to go out there and do it. So that does good. It does good to the church. It does good to the body of Christ for people to be active in this kind of a ministry. And I know that in my personal walk with the Lord, going out there and engaging the public in this ministry is something that it increases my understanding of what I read in the Bible. It increases my faith in God and in his word when I see what happens and how people respond when we go out and obey his commands. And it's a blessing. I said earlier that it's a struggle with the flesh every time, or just about every time. We have to deal with the flesh. Doesn't want to do this, but we want to just. I don't think there's ever been a time, and I can't tell you how many times we've been out doing public ministry. I don't think there's ever been a time where I have in any way regretted that I went and took that time to be involved in that outreach. It's always been a blessing. You always feel like you get a boost from it, even though you sacrificed a couple of hours in an evening that you could have been doing something else that wouldn't have been as profitable. It is personally, spiritually profitable to the person who participates in it. And so that's more of the good that it does. Not that we have to defend that, you could just simply say, this is, this is what we're supposed to do, and we're doing it. Okay. So handling police encounters, and that's basically what we're going to be going over in this section. So, again, remain calm, pray, don't get in the flesh. It's a lot easier said than done when you see, a police officer heading your way and you're expecting that there's going to be some kind of conflict or controversy. It's hard to, I know for me, I can feel my adrenaline come in. My heart starts beating faster, and even if I know that I'm right, if I think that he's going to cause a problem, you start getting that fight or flight reaction, I guess. So it takes some prayer and some thought. Can we cut the lights?
Yes, sir.
Try not to get in the flesh while we're dealing with the police. And it's good to be polite and respectful when you're dealing with anybody, in particular in dealing with the police. And I always say it's good to have one person dealing with the officers, one spokesman and a witness with a and with a video camera. You want to record the encounter with the police. And then everybody else in the group can go ahead and continue doing what they're doing. We don't have, everybody gets curious and wants to know, well, what's going on with the police? And if you don't say ahead of time, this is how we handle police situations, brother so-and-so and brother so-and-so are going to be dealing with the officers, and everybody else carry on do what you're doing unless you're specifically ordered by the police to stop. But usually they'll come and they'll start, inquiring, and so, we want people to go ahead and get things sort of under control. Don't crowd around the officers. We don't want them to get nervous. Is everybody out of the bathroom now? Yeah, okay. So, we don't want the officers to feel threatened. So don't crowd around them. It's a good idea to, as I said, to video record what's going on with the officers. Most jurisdictions have specifically stated that video recording of police when they're in a public place doing their official duties, that is protected by the First Amendment. You have a First Amendment right to record the police. That the Supreme Court has not ruled on that specifically, and so we have 11 federal judicial circuits plus the DC Circuit Court. So there's 12 federal circuit courts, and the way the federal law works is if the Supreme Court hasn't said what the rule is, each circuit court of appeals gets to decide what the rule is within their territorial jurisdiction. So every circuit court that has published an opinion on this has come to the same conclusion, that you have. Wait. Let me take that back. Every circuit court that has specifically ruled whether you have a right under the First Amendment to record the police or not has said yes, you do. But there are several circuit courts that have said we haven't ruled. That hasn't been decided up to this point in this circuit, and so none of them have said the First Amendment does not protect your right to record the police. None of them has said that. Some of them, in fact, about half of them have said you do have the right to record the police under the First Amendment, and the other half either haven't addressed it at all, or when they've been asked to address it, they've said, well, we haven't said one way or the other yet, and we're not deciding today. So, but there's good reason, and I have that other handout on the right to record police where I go into, some detail about that. But you should be able to record the police. I believe I believe that any court would say that it is protected under the First Amendment to do that, and I would do it. Whether I'm in a jurisdiction where it's been decided or not, I would go ahead and do that.
How about when the cops are telling you, like, shut that camera off?
Well, sir, I have a First Amendment right to keep this camera on. You're a public officer in a public place performing your public duties, and I have, the courts have said I have a right to do this. It's not 100%. I can't tell you in certain jurisdictions I can tell you 100% yes. Tennessee is in the 6th Judicial Circuit. That's one of the circuits that has not decided specifically. So they haven't said no, but they haven't said yes yet either. So, that's about the best I can tell you.
There's out of California, they're trying to force an 8-foot rule. We had to, at least if you're going to photograph, you got to get 8 foot now.
Yeah. Well, that
one's been threatened.
Okay. Well, yeah, and that's what we want to do is I agree. I think that you need to keep your distance. You can't do it if it's going to be interfering with them performing their duties. So sometimes you have a cop making an arrest and someone's coming, within a foot of the officer and holding a camera to his face while he's arresting somebody, and they're interfering. There's no reason for you to be that close. You just you're having a discussion with nobody's getting arrested. You're having a discussion with a police officer, and there are certain things that you want to establish on the record when you're talking with them, and nobody has to be in their face. You can be 5 feet away. You can be 10 feet away, and recording the interaction and getting on there what you need to. So, you know, we don't want to give them any legitimate reason to stop you from what you're doing or to confiscate your camera. We you know, if they're going to do something and violate your rights, we want it to be a very clear violation of your rights that's unjustified. We don't want it to be where you're giving them an excuse to do something. So so anyway, the reasons we want to do the video recording is, number one, it's good evidence. If it's going to be something that comes into court, or even just something to deal with, you know, we have an interaction with a police officer on the street and somebody's telling me about it, and so I call the city attorney or I call the police chief and I say, you know, well, this is what is reported that's happened, and they say, well, I haven't seen the police. Let me see what the officer says. Let me see the police report. And, you know, they're not necessarily going to report things as it actually happened. But if you have a recording of it, then that's going to be, you know, better evidence. Number two, officers tend to be more careful and more professional with you when they know that they're being recorded. And number three, in some states, it may not be legal to record secretly. And so you can let them either just do it openly or let them know, you know, I'm recording this interaction. You need to specifically ask, let's see what I got on here. So don't crowd on the officers, continue to give out tracts, remember to remain calm. You know, you're dealing with the officer. He's supposed to enforce the law. You can remind them, reassure them you're not intending to break the law. If you have documentation like we talked about, go ahead and show it to them. That's why you're carrying it with you, is just in case you have an encounter like that. And then ask specifically, what law are you being accused of violating? Okay, that's important. It lets them know that you're aware of your rights, and you know that you're not going to be bullied into giving up your free speech rights without legal justification. And it's important to determine the legal authority by which they're trying to suppress your right of free speech. So we want to know, on what basis are they telling you to stop? They can't just say, I don't like you doing this here. They have to have a legal reason. They have to have some authority, and that authority is a state law or a local ordinance that says, you know, what they're doing. So ask them for that. Sometimes they don't have an answer for you. Sometimes they'll give you an answer, and you look up the ordinance, and the ordinance doesn't say what they say it says. We were passing out gospel tracts in Daytona Beach, and the city has an ordinance, as I said before, that says it's illegal to distribute literature in the city of Daytona Beach unless you're handing it to a person that's willing to receive it. So we were out passing out gospel tracts, and police officers came, you can't pass out literature here. We have an ordinance that says you can't pass out literature. Well, if you look at your ordinance, the ordinance says you can't pass out literature unless you're handing it to a person willing to receive it. So we took that, we made a copy of that ordinance and kept it in our pockets so that when they came and told us that they didn't know what they were talking about, we showed them that we knew what we were talking about. So anyway, so asking what law you're supposedly violating, you can ask for a supervisor to be sent to your location. And this is a very effective tool. And so remember this one. You can ask, and if you're not getting anywhere with the first officer, if they don't back off immediately, which sometimes they do when they realize you know what you're talking about and you're not going to be bullied, they'll just back off right away. But if they don't, ask for a supervisor. Well, I guess I can't say most. I know that there are many, probably most jurisdictions, most law enforcement agencies, if a citizen asks for a supervisor, that the officer is required to call a supervisor. He's violating department policy if he does not call a supervisor, meaning a sergeant or a lieutenant or somebody above, to come to your location and deal with it. And the reasons why you want to have a supervisor, the higher ranking officers have more experience, more education. They're more likely to understand the nuances of First Amendment law. The rank and file police officers a lot of times don't have all of that information or all of that experience, and they make mistakes. Not only that, but they are trained. Police officers are trained to, they call it, use a command voice. They come and they take charge of a situation, and they start throwing their weight around and giving orders and telling people what to do. And most people will just go ahead and do what they said because, number one, since they were a child, they've been told, obey police officers. Number two, they're stepping into that role of, I'm taking charge of the situation. And whether they had a gun and a badge or not, somebody that tends to do that, usually most people are going to back off and limit. But if you know that you have the right to do what you're doing and that they're making a mistake, most of the time it's not that they hate the gospel or they hate Christians or they're trying to cause a problem for you. Most of the time, they just don't understand. And so, my biggest job is just educating the officers and sometimes the city officials, of what the First Amendment requires. But if you know that you have the right to do what you're doing, you don't have to back off and back down when they start bossing you around. You can say, sir, we have a constitutional right to do this. Well, you can't do this here. Can I talk to your supervisor? And then the supervisor comes, and the supervisor, when they come, they've been trained in conflict de-escalation. They've been trained in getting things calmed down and reasoning with people. And there's reasons for, I'm not saying that the frontline cops are bad or stupid or anything. I mean, there's reasons why they have to very often take charge of situations. But, in a situation like this, you want to deal with somebody that you can reason with. And a lot of times we talk to the supervisor, and the supervisor tells the other officer, they're okay, just leave them alone. And then problem is solved. And so that's what we want to do. If the officer won't call a supervisor, you can call the police department and say, I'm having a problem with a police officer here. I'd like to request a supervisor to come to this location, and they'll do that.
You can do that? That won't.
Yeah, you can.
Legal?
That is absolutely legal. I had a police chief tell me at one time, after we had dealt with their officers, and just had one time after another, the police chief kept saying, you're right, the officer's wrong. We need to get it right. We will retrain them. But we kept having problems, and so the police chief told me, if they won't have a supervisor come to your location, just dial 911 and ask for a supervisor to come to your location. Which a few years later, I had a situation like that, and they didn't call a supervisor. So I said, well, fine, I'll get a supervisor here. And I dialed 911, and they told me, this is not an appropriate use of 911. This is not what 911 is for. So you should have the non-emergency number of the sheriff's department or the police department. So that police chief told me wrong. Now he's the sheriff, so he's a good guy, actually. He helped us a lot. But anyway, so once you get with somebody that you can reason with, hopefully you'll be able to reason with them about your right of free speech, and they'll know enough about it that they'll know to back off. This is extremely important. If a police officer if they're not going to admit that you have the right to do what you want to do, you have to ask this question. Do you intend to arrest me if I don't stop preaching? Do you intend to arrest me if I don't stop witnessing, or if I don't leave the area, or whatever they're illegally telling you to do? You ask them, do you intend to arrest me if I don't do this? All right, it's extremely important to do that. And the reasons are, number one, you need to distinguish clearly between a command that the officer intends to enforce, which may violate your rights if they're trying to enforce a command that they are not allowed to enforce, then that shows that they're violating your rights. So is it a mere suggestion or request? Which, if it's a suggestion or request, you can decline to abide by their suggestion or their request, and you can decline that without penalty. So that's number one reason why you have to ask that question. You have to make it clear, because sometimes what happens is we get to this point, the Christian witness doesn't ask this question. They stop witnessing and they go home and they call me, and I call the police chief, or I call the city mayor or whatever, and then the response I get back was, well, they weren't, that wasn't a command. They were just trying to, resolve the situation. They were making a request. They didn't violate your client's rights by commanding them to do this. So you have to distinguish, is it a command or not? Okay. And very often when you ask that question, then they back off, because they know that is a line drawn in the sand right there, and they're not going to step over that line. Okay? If they're not sure that what they're telling you, they have the right to tell you, then all of a sudden you start hearing this. Oh, well, no, I'm just making a request. It seems to me it's the Christian thing to do. Those people complained about you, so why don't you just move 2 blocks down there? And if you want to be Christian, then go ahead and do that. They use that kind of language, but now all of a sudden they're just making a request. Well, if a police officer makes a request, you could say, no, thank you, I'm going to stay right here. Or you can go and do what they ask, but but then you're not they're not violating your rights by asking you to move. So
How about if he says, yeah, that's the command?
If he says, yeah, that's the command, then say, okay, then I'll stop. Get their name. You hopefully have all this on video, and now you have grounds for a lawsuit against them. Or we have grounds to go back to, or to make a complaint against them with internal affairs. Or we can, go to the police chief, or, say, look, you've got a problem here with this officer. Is this your policy, or is this officer just, doing something he's not supposed to do? And then you get the assurances from them. Oh, they shouldn't have done that. We apologize. We'll give it to you in writing that you have the right to do this, so that if another officer makes the same mistake, you can tell them. Or, at one point, I had a telephone number for the internal affairs sergeant for Daytona Beach Police Department saved in my cell phone, because we had so many issues with the police where they just didn't know what they were doing, and they kept violating our rights. And so, I said, excuse me, I'm going to call Sergeant Pera, okay? And I dial Sergeant Pera, and he says, I explain what's going on. He says, put the officer on the phone. And I hand my phone to the police officer, and he hands the phone back, and he walks away. He doesn't say, I'm sorry. He doesn't say, I was wrong. I don't care. I don't want an apology. I don't want an admission. I just want him to leave me alone. And so, so that can be very effective. So that's real important. And again, remember that there's other people around that see what's going on. I was in a public park in Orlando, and we were at an event walking through, passing out tracts, and the police came. Oh, you can't do this here. They surrounded us. You can't hand out that literature. And other people were watching, and people came up. I want to get give me one of those cards that they're telling you can't pass out, because people get curious. But more important than that, they want to see how you're responding to the police or to whatever situation you have, and sometimes it really makes an impression on them in a good way. So you can choose to comply with the officer's commands and then bring the issue either to city officials or to the court, rather than be arrested. So which, if they won't back down and they threaten to arrest you, then I would say, you're done there. There's no reason to be arrested. It doesn't do anything extra for you as far as your legal rights are concerned. If you choose to remain and you are arrested, do not resist the officers in any way, okay? Very important. You don't want to get, they've got a bad, First Amendment violation against you. You don't want to give them a good resisting arrest or, some other problem. Also, know this, and I don't anymore, but I used to practice criminal law. An arrest very often is a violent event. Okay, even though you're a nice Christian and you've never been in trouble before, when they decide they're going to arrest you, they don't have to say, "Would you please extend your arms so that we can put the cuffs on you?" What they may do is just take you down to the ground, and it may hurt and it may injure you, and that comes with being arrested. There's no reason to be arrested. I know we have some brethren that consider it a badge of honor that, oh, I got arrested for preaching, but well, yeah, but you didn't have to. You could have made the same point.
What should you say when you're going to stop so they don't escalate it into an arrest?
Well, you say, okay, I'm all right, I'm done. If you're saying you're going to arrest me, I believe you're violating my rights, but I'm not willing to go to jail today. I'll talk to my attorney and see you later. So, all right. So, and don't give them any legitimate reason to arrest you. As First Peter says, if you suffer as a Christian, great. If you suffer as a wrongdoer, then that's not so good. So, so that's that. All right, this is our final section, and I'll just whip through this. It'll only take a couple minutes. Taking it to the streets, choosing a location. It depends. The location is going to depend on what you're going to do, or what you want to do is going to determine what kind of location you want to go to. So what might be good for holding signs and preaching may not be a good venue for tracts. So, depending on traffic patterns and pedestrian, etc. So you want to look for those kind of patterns and adjust your methods accordingly. Look at competing uses. If there's other things going on in the area where you're going, again, we don't want to be interfering with other people's rights. We don't want to be obnoxious in what we're doing. We just want to get our message out. Okay, how to present yourselves. Number one, personal hygiene. You would think that you don't have to mention this, but you do have to mention this. So, brush your teeth, be clean, wear appropriate clothing. A lot of us wear scripture shirts or Jesus Saves shirts. That's great. I do that. If you feel like, I know there's some people that feel like if I'm going to be preaching or I'm going to be representing the Lord, I should wear a shirt and tie and all that. Or you may be in a community where they think if you go out there with a Jesus Saves t-shirt on, you're somehow being disrespectful. But if you go out there dressed like this, then you're going to be more, better received. It's a personal preference kind of thing. It's not a right or wrong thing, but you might want to give some thought to it, how you're addressed. Attitude, as we talked about before, is extremely important. And then dealing with fear, ask God for help. If, especially, the first time doing it, or the first few times doing it, it's hard to get out there and take that first step sometimes. And so pray about it. The disciples prayed for boldness. Remember, it's not about you. We're not concerned about, what people think of me. It's not even my message. It's the Lord's message. We're telling them what the Bible says. So, we don't need to take things personally. By the way, even children can do this. It's, anybody can do this. Again, think about, if you're afraid, think about, well, what is it that I'm afraid of? You're not going to get beaten and thrown in prison like happened in the book of Acts. Not here in America, you're not. And so, just give some thought to that, and then trust God and do it. and I'll tell you, this is my experience, even after doing it for many years. When I go out on the street, if I'm going to lift up my voice and preach, there's that little bit of trepidation. There's a little bit of butterflies in the stomach before I get started. But I'll tell you this, that every time when I start out with "the Bible says," once you've got that phrase out, all of that goes away. Now and it's not you, it's the Bible. You're just telling them what the Bible says. And so, my friends, the Bible says, "For God so loved the world," and you just, and I'm telling you, it goes away right away. And, it does get easier with time, but the flesh never gets completely dead. So it's always an issue to a degree. And then I was like, at the end, we go, so, you go together. If you have a church van or you carpool or whatever, you go someplace to do some ministry. When you come back, everybody is just pumped up coming back. I talked to this person, they said this, they said that, and just compare experiences. And it's a blessing to share that with one another, and encourage the church, encourage the body of believers. It's a blessing. By the way, this was at that Titusville Bacchus festival where the irate lady was and these cops back here, they never gave us a second look. Once I dealt with them and told them, look, we've already had a discussion about this, and we just had a great time there. And but they were still in the middle of dealing with the objectors, and we're going home. We're walking, we're leaving at this point. They're still dealing with aggravation, and we just had a great time. So anyway, so rejoice, praise God, pray together, thank the Lord. It's just doing public ministry is just such a boost to fellowship. And, we come together to worship, and we sing together, and we hear the sermons, and we shake hands, and how are you doing, and all that. And all of that is just kind of surface level, or a little bit better than surface level. But you go out and work together on public ministry, and all of a sudden you have a deep bond and a deep relationship with each other. It really is, the best thing that can happen to a church is for people to come together and work together outside of the church doors, not just come in here and worship together.